Hello marketer, it's Ty here and welcome to another episode of Lean Mean Marketing Teams. Today we're joined by an e-commerce marketing powerhouse, Dan Ferguson, CMO at Adore Beauty. Dan joined Adore Beauty back in 2018 as CMO and doubled returning customer growth and revenue in his first 6 months. Since joining, he's responsible for brand and data. He's led high and sustained rates of new customer acquisition through enhanced analytics and marketing initiatives across multiple channels, including the launch of Adore Beauty's Beauty IQ Uncensored podcast, which has been ranked #1 in beauty and fashion on iTunes. Dan has over 20 years experience in e-commerce and digital marketing and has worked for the likes of Vistaprint, Officeworks, and cut his teeth at Dell. This is another jam-packed episode and slightly on the long side, but well worth sticking around for. We'll cover Dan's fascinating background and how the learning early in his career has helped him achieve those outstanding growth records, how he helped Adore Beauty IPO and what impact this had on Dan's role and that of the marketing team, how during the pandemic they launched a TV campaign in about 3 weeks to reach a wider audience and build brand awareness for Adore Beauty, knowing that a spike in e-commerce was on the horizon, how they've launched and built a #1 podcast show, and what CMOs can learn about the ins, outs, pros and cons of launching a podcast, how Dan has built a modern marketing team, including how he overhauled the data function. And finally, we dive deep into Dan's take on leadership and some of the lessons he's learned along the way to build a strong culture and attract great talent. As always, if you like the show, please remember to hit subscribe or follow and leave us a review. If you hear something you like and you like to take action on your podcast, then please remember to download the notes. We take detailed notes on every single episode with all the tips and strategies. Thank you, Dylan, for listening back to each episode to craft those notes. And another shout out to Lewis, who is our podcast editor, for all your help in mixing and editing each of these audio episodes and our YouTube videos. Now, let's get on with the show.
Welcome to Lean Mean Marketing Teams with Ty Hayes, where you'll hear from leading CMOs and thought leaders about what it takes to create a high-performance marketing team. This podcast is brought to you by Growth Generators, a consulting firm that helps CMOs design and build modern marketing teams that drive growth. If you need help optimizing your marketing team, head to growthgenerators.io. Now, let's get on to the show.
Welcome, Dan Ferguson, CMO at Adore Beauty, to the Lean Mean Marketing Teams podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we have a previous guest to thank, Mal Chia. He was back in episode 15 from Riderware to thank for the introduction. Thank you, Mal. And thank you, Dan, for your patience. I know this episode's been a little while in the making.
I love talking.
Awesome. And I'm really excited for the show today as well. We've got an amazing track record in e-commerce with some well-known brands and been kicking some absolute goals at Adore Beauty, helping them IPO and drive significant growth. I think we're just having a chat before we went live, looking at the latest annual report. And yeah, lots of results in there to be proud of and love to dig into some of that today. But to kick things off, can you give us a brief summary of your career today?
Yeah, sure. I think I probably came from an almost non-marketer's background. I started in advertising and then moved very quickly to Dell Computer. And that was really my founding in marketing, Dell Computer. And back in when I joined them was around about 2002. That marketing was massive. First of all, the spend I had was about 25 million back then. And a significant amount of that was digital, which was, there was not that much digital to buy back then. And it was also very structured. So we would do 60 ads across all newspapers, 20 different formats of ads across digital, so on and so on. And every one of them would have very tight tracking, either a phone number with a bunch of codes to quote, or digital, obviously with lots of links and codes. And so every day I would spend X and every day I would know that I got X. Yeah, so marketing was quite formulaic, but also very measurable, very data-driven. It was almost like seeing into the future because Dell was a US company that was really big, really disruptive, and they were doing everything on data-driven. And so I went to, I think it was Officeworks, and I went, hey, we've got to revolutionize our online business here. And B, when we do it, we can be so much more measurable, and let's invest like crazy as well. And so I brought that passion and that kind of advantage to the next few roles I had, just starting up online businesses or kind of completely disrupting the existing online business they had to really scale growth in Officeworks. And then I think I had a brief stint at Maya and then on to General Pants, where I launched and scaled them and very quickly. And then Vistaprint, another US giant that was disruptive. And I think that by that stage, only 10 years ago, a little bit even less. And so that gave me much more current information and about how the US was doing e-commerce. So again, got a whole bunch of more focus on data, but also much more detail around that and how the US and how leading practice in e-commerce was working there, but not so much brand. And so my marketing experience was really this kind of like, hey, if you A plus B equals C, there wasn't much room for the intangibles and the non-linear aspects of marketing channels. It took a while where I started to get sort of CMO roles where you have to be responsible for brand. And I was in a couple of startups and a few other kinds of companies. And even in those ones where it was like, there's not much money to spend on brand, you still need to be thinking about brand. So I had to grow that ability, but also even that value in my marketing practice more recently in my last sort of 5 to 10. So that's kind of what brought me here today, really. And then sort of joined Adore 3.5 years ago and had an absolute roller coaster of all the sort of the hallmarks from some of the other stuff I've done in my career, which is really high growth and really sort of tight view on data, but also brand, actively growing the stuff that's much harder to measure and sort of diving into that and enjoying it, really. This has been the turning point for me. That's what brought me here.
Yeah, fascinating background, and what a way to start. Dell with budget so large and such a direct response focus, all that tracking and analytics, and just seeing how that new business model at the time really took off. They kind of revolutionized a different way to sell computers, and then taking that through all your roles, and then, like I say, at Vistaprint, seeing how it's done in the US, which are often a little bit ahead of Australia in terms of e-commerce and all those learnings, and then how you've had to pick up the brand piece, and fantastic to hear you're now enjoying it. And obviously through COVID, and I think in a lot of e-commerce retail, it seems to be a bit of a trend, start digital direct, getting these really strong results with the hyper targeting, and then reach a point where it's, well, how do we reach a bigger audience? How do we capture this addressable audience and dive deeper into brands? So I'd love to unpack how you've gone about that as we go through on the interview today. But for those that may not know as much about Adore Beauty, can you tell us a bit more about them?
Yeah, look, Adore Beauty is Australia's largest pure play online beauty retailer. And we're also the beauty retailer choice for a significant amount of Australia's population that are interested in buying beauty online and beauty full stop. And we also have a large audience, people interested in skincare and beauty through our podcasts, YouTube, blogs on our site, and media, I guess, generally is something that we have an audience for. So we sell 220 plus brands, different brands from basic to bougie as my team, and have all sorts of brands in there from Giorgio Armani to your everyday important basics like The Ordinary, some skincare specialists like Medicate, and hair care like Kerastase. So there's lots of, I just dropped a few brands there, but I think one of the things is we acknowledge that not everything is right for every person. Everybody has their own unique needs, and that's what's great about our offering is that because we've got a broad range of brands, good depth, and lots of content information on our site, we help people choose the right stuff for them, and with an open approach, a democratic approach, a whatever's right for you approach.
Yeah, fantastic. And since joining there, you've obviously been kicking some goals. You've reduced costs, grow customers, grow the brand, overhaul the data function, provide a better shopping experience. You've been recognised as the number 4 in the top people in e-commerce in Australia. Congrats on that. You've helped them prepare for a successful IPO. So maybe backtracking to 3 years ago, obviously they saw the phenomenal background and experience that you had and could see what you could bring to the table. But what was your remit when you joined? Was the IPO clearly on the table at that stage, or what were you brought in to do?
I think any great startup, usually the founders are deeply connected to marketing because they had to. They literally had to use marketing to claw their way up. And so that was no different at Adore. I think both the founders had different marketing strengths, but definite marketing strengths. Yeah, they're quite a powerhouse. And I think some of what I was brought into was literally to be a professional marketer, because to date they had sort of built their own team and done it themselves. And I think there was an element of that. There was an element of scaling to the next level, taking the business forward and adding sort of the detail and sort of career experience I had around the different components of marketing. So not just the channels, but like retention and acquisition and data and the approach to data.
Yeah. So you realized partway through there, you had to build the brand in order to build trust and awareness. It's key to new customer growth. How did you go about it, given that was possibly something new for Adore Beauty?
Yeah, look, I think there was not an intentional decision. So, because one of the funny things is people often talk about how you decided to build brand, but unfortunately or fortunately for us marketers and for businesses, you can't help but customers are going to build a brand anyway. They're going to have a set of beliefs and assumptions about what you stand for and who you are, and also why they like you, and we had done that for many years. We'd started 20 years ago. So the business and, Kate as the key founder had really built a strong brand, loyal tribe of customers who deeply cared about the brand and felt aligned to that and saw their own values in the brand, and it would have termed it their beauty best friend. The authenticity of the brand was important to them. So the brand had was busily being built. It's just that we hadn't, I think there was a few things. One is that the initial years of our setup, I think when it came to our own brand, we were probably a little bit more shy than when it came to selling the brands of all the different retail brands that we partner with. Up to a certain stage, we felt lucky that they were willing to sell through this e-commerce channel because that wasn't a given for a long time in Australian retail. And so what that meant was that we were very agnostic, and our tone of voice was, the goal was to be inobtrusive and to sell their products and to talk about their products in the way that the brand guidelines would ask us to, and so on. Now, I think what happened is that over time, that sort of the organic passion that our team has, that across the business, all the different sort of teams have for the products and the market that we're in, sort of just slowly came out. First of all, our social and content, but also on our website and in the ways we did things. So open reviews, articles that were very personal, that we sort of slowly diverged off script and talked about the real experience of things. This combination of products and brands that normally wouldn't always sit next to around each other, really basic everyday brands with more luxury brands. That was acknowledging that people are like that. I'm wearing a t-shirt with a suit jacket. Who mix that in your life? And so that brand was developed organically, and we did it sort of a starting gate out from this, hey, we want to be very cautious, to, hey, you know what, we're growing and our brands like what we're doing. So let's slowly shift our focus to what do customers engage with. Definitely through my time at Adore, it's a real accelerating feature too, both in terms of our investment and focus there and just our output. So the number of articles, the amount of content we produce, the sort of hundreds of stories and so on Instagram, that has increased in volume, but also the tone of voice has become much more authentic and real. That's been sort of powered by a switch to, hey, what do customers engage with? And that probably is a lead indicator for us that we're resonating. And it's like a micro brand indicator as well. Now, how people feel about the last Instagram post they saw from you is not the same as what your brand stands for, but actually, I think our consumer environment is swinging that way. Like it used to be, I would watch a Coca-Cola commercial on the TV, and I'd watch many of them over a period of time, and I would form hey, they told me that they're all about fun in the sun and that they're exciting. And so I believe that. And next time I'm in the supermarket, I will associate all that with that can on the shelf and I'll put it off. I think it's completely changed now, because the gap between, I'm interested in something and I'm going to buy it online is necessarily much shorter. And so there's lots of micro decisions that comes along with much more variability. I think that our social and content sort of metrics and data have been used to inform the organic brand we've built. Going back, way back to your original question, which is, hey, when you decided to build brand, so we'd already built it, but once we actually went sort of almost a little bit earlier than this time last year, and we realized that the market was going to change, that we were going to see a very significant influx of new customers to online for the first time, that became much more important to go, hey, okay, if we're seeing new audience to online, we need to build our brand, we need to build trust, and we need to understand where we are relative to the rest of our market and sort of use that to build our own sort of North Star and where we want to go with our brand. And so that original thinking powered let's do some marketing and advertising that isn't tied to return and ROAS like our digital performance channels might be. And so there was this incredibly short process where we had to find an agency, and we did that. I think it took about a week of tender and response. And so we decided on our agency. So Cummins and Partners was selected. And then we went through, it must have been about a 3-week, from brief to on air for our first TV ad. And in typical fashion, we approached it with lots of measurement. We did a geo split test, all that sort of stuff. And we also, I think, did a reasonable job. And by reasonable, I look back and go, that was amazing. But I think context of, in hindsight, you go, hey, what could we have done better? I think we did a pretty reasonable job of approximating our organic brand, so what is real? How do we interpret that in a TV ad? What are the things we want to communicate in, 15 or 30 seconds? And then going, okay, well, how do we want to see the impact of this, and how do we want to hold ourselves accountable to improving?
So much in that, talking about the way that branding has changed from mass media and commercial ads, and I guess that influencing how people think, to the micro moments, the fragmentation of media, the number of touch points that influence decisions and all those micro decisions. And just an interesting backstory. I didn't realize it was 20 years that Adore's been going, and the conundrum that you do face, and I could see how you've kind of grown up where at first you're probably just representing these brands and the internal voice or brand may have been more in the back seat, but as you've grown, you've connected more with your audience through those reviews and that almost objective friend. Here's some different products, and knowing that there's always a different product for them at different levels from everyday to luxury. And then I guess using all of that data from Instagram and the posts and what works, the results, to then build that up into more of a brand story and a TVC to execute that based on all the learning you've had is really fascinating.
I reflect on it often, and I think things like our podcast and PR spend, brand has all this constellation of impacts, and you're still branding your SEM spend. I think customers are much more, hey, how was my experience yesterday? In terms of going, well, what does the brand stand for and what is its value to me? I think our interactions were longer, more involved. I had to decide to drive to the shop. I drove there. I saw the signage. I went in there. There was much more three dimensions to the experience. And without that, it kind of just means that there is accountability need as a marketer to make sure that your yesterday, last week is backing up your brand just as much as your big TV ad.
Yeah. And you're still reaching them across platforms. E-commerce, you're one click away. So, I'll just go to the next website to buy that. And why should I buy it through you versus going direct to the brand? All those things which customers will be deciding on as they go through the purchase funnel and decide where they want to buy their products from. The podcast, love to dig into that. So it's obviously had incredible success. Number one spot, I think, in the arts and fashion and beauty podcast charts in Australia. Is that right?
It's been number one many times, consistently highly ranked in the Australian podcast charts and globally across a lot of other podcast charts as well.
Yeah, and huge download numbers. So what was the genesis of the podcast and how important has it been as part of your overall marketing strategy?
Yeah, look, I think the genesis was that organic extension of our brand. When we decided to do brand, part of it was also because I think as a combined team, we're kind of proud of our different approach to beauty. And so there was this excitement about conveying that different approach. And so the same goes here, I think. It was podcast is a different media format. It's almost the antithesis of Instagram. Instagram is aesthetic and managed and ordered and relatively surface. Podcast requires you, there's no pictures, requires you to talk, and it values authenticity. There's a lot of same thing that happened on Instagram around influencers and being authentic. When that happens on podcast, if you're authentic with your words, it's actually much deeper than being authentic with your picture. That's actually arguable, but there is naturally more depth in a 30-minute conversation than there is in a single photo.
Given you're data-driven, how do you measure the return on investment, or how are you tying it back to brand metrics and consideration through the funnel?
Yeah, so I think there's a number. When we started out, the intention was to communicate that authenticity, that democratic approach to beauty, and loosely grow an audience. And so going to your metrics point, I think there was a couple of critical things. One is we chose two hosts for the first program. There's been subsequently quite a few other podcasts, but for the first program, we chose two hosts. And one of those hosts was quite an expert in beauty and skincare. And the other host was probably the opposite of that, sort of a newbie to beauty. I wanted that combination of hosts because one could disrupt the other. Hannah would ask Joe questions around, hey, what does that acronym mean? And, really, is that important? So that the conversation became about the 360-degree conversation that actually anyone that chats about beauty, and let's just say the women in our audience, when they're talking about beauty, that conversation is not limited to beauty products, aspirational looks. It's a wide-ranging, free-ranging conversation that's often hilarious. It covers things that weren't mentioned. The unglamorous side of beauty, the awkward or funny or gross side of beauty. And I think that people who love beauty love all those bits as well. And so it was an opportunity for us to have that wider conversation. And our audience loved it. We sort of, because we measure these things, we can almost see that when we talk about stuff that isn't normally talked about, there is instant engagement. When we talk about stuff that in particular beauty retailers don't usually talk about, so other retailers' products, there is instant engagement. And that's because I think some of those things indicate trust. So that's what set the sort of loose goals. It was this, hey, let's have an honest conversation. Let's sort of do things that aren't being done elsewhere, and let's build an audience. And that was kind of flowing from that, hey, we started out going, well, how should we express our brands and what is profitable will help us grow our business. That's where we started at. we moved to what are customers engaged with. And then I think that expressed itself in the podcast around what grows an audience, what will hold people. And that's much more of a media focus, right? So we started looking at things like consumption of the podcast. How long are people listening? In the first 5 minutes, what's the drop-off rate? How do we change that around? What impact does different subjects or topics have? All that stuff we measured. And then tied back to the business, there's been a lot of things that we've used, tried, some of them discarded, other ones we continue to use. Things like the products we mentioned. We've done some sort of unique offers for our podcast listeners. And also, obviously, there's lots of links and so on Apple, but also on Spotify, on the different places that people can listen to us. There's links at which can look at data from that and understand, what kind of value is flowing back to the business. I think that the important thing was that we made this decision around, hey, we want to grow the audience. We know there's value. Intuitive, we know it's right. We will sort of expect and ask to have a measurable element here so that we have some reassurance that this investment is working. But we also focus on growing media, growing our audience and growing their engagement and getting to be better at that engagement point, So as retailers going, hey, we're almost running a radio show. What will hold our listeners for 30 to 45 minutes? And if we sort of remove hey, we're a retailer, we can only talk about these things, suddenly the topic and subject matter is really wide. And so is the audience engagement and opportunity there.
That's what I love about this medium, just the ability to have a 30 to 50 to an hour long conversation and listeners tune in and in their personal space. You're not competing. It's not a 7 to 10 second attention span. They really do get immersed, and when they hear the host talk about things that kind of matter to them and they engage weekly, it's such a great way to build trust with an audience and have those wide-ranging conversations and like you say, to build an audience. And I think that's the beauty of podcasts. You can build an audience and kind of figure out what you do with it later, as long as you're adding value and coming at it from the listener's point of view as to what do they care about. How can we join their conversation, and talk about things that matter to them rather than through other channels where, it's often more promotional. So
yeah, 100% agree. I love the fact that when you listen to a podcast, you're choosing to listen to it.
Yeah.
Right? Like with a radio show, it's only on between 7 and 9. So you have to tune in and usually you're doing something else. Whereas with podcasts, you go, you know what? I'm going to listen to a podcast now. And so you're choosing to be there. And that makes all the difference in terms of the engagement, the lack of distraction, and I think the pleasure of the medium too. It's a choice and almost, I think for some people, a reward or a moment to reflect. There's some really great things about podcasting, but also diversification of media that entails, because we can reach our audience with a whole new conversation that we could never do before.
Yeah, and it's so good at building that intimacy and trust. People tune in every week. They're going to listen to you for hours on end. But in terms of the marketing and production of the podcast, how involved is your team with that? And what advice would you have for any other CMOs or marketing teams considering launching a podcast? Yeah,
so we work with some external suppliers to do production, but they're largely all in-house. So that's been sort of a slow build of experience and I guess IP. Our hosts are in-house. Most of our talent are in-house. We have lots of special guest stars, but that process of finding those guest stars has also been an incredible journey of learnings and knowledge gaining and expertise. So I think that's been a really great thing about the experience too. As a marketing team, we've brought our abilities and started to understand new medium. I think if I was going to recommend this or talk about this to any others, you actually have to have a purpose. And ideally that purpose it's like if I had a conversation with you and my goal was to talk about me. And unfortunately for retailers, that tends to be what we're driven to do, right? We want to talk about ourselves so that you come and visit us, whether that be online or offline, and then buy stuff. That approach isn't going to work that well if you're having a podcast, because it's conversation. And in conversation, what people love is being listened to, being acknowledged, and the topics of conversation being something they care about, less often yourself. So I would say that you want to have a purpose for it. That purpose should be aligned with what your audience loves and cares about. And if you're going to do anything with the time, it should be, flexible, be fun, be good for your team, have a strategic connection to your business. For us, it's about building that audience. It's about introducing them to the Adore brand, but it's also about living our value of authenticity around beauty, retail, skincare, all the different kinds of products we sell, being open and having discussions. Discussions themselves are authentic generally because they're two-way. People can ask questions. So that's, I think that's part of how we sort of approach that. That's our purpose. If you're going to start one, if you're another CMO out there listening, define how it's going to plug into your business, why, but also what you want to do with that, why you'll keep coming back to it. I don't think you should start a podcast and then stop it. And you probably need to be committed to it in the long term because you want to build that audience. There's a lot of wastage if you start it and stop it. Yeah, I think that's probably the key principles.
Great advice. Yeah, that's pod fade is real. I think 9 episodes is usually when pod fade kicks in and they stop. So having that long-term view connected back to your business is absolutely critical. I'd also add not underestimating the level of effort that it takes to actually reach out to guests, do your discussion cards, host the interviews, you post-production, and then like any other product, can't just expect to get the growth to come organically. So did you guys put much effort behind the promotion of the product, or were you lucky in that it was organic?
Yeah, no, we definitely promoted it. And I think that's the other point here is that as an online retailer, we have an active database, over 800,000. We have total databases in the millions. That is an audience every month on our site of in the millions. Now, the Today Show, last time I checked, their audience in the mornings was, under 300,000. Every one of us as large retailers, online retailers, this is a unprecedented sort of audience access and opportunity, because at the moment, I think most Australian retailers look at this as we have this many people in our database who we can sell things to. But what does that equation look like if you go, we have this many people that know our brand and are interested in what we might have to say because they do have some kind of transactional relationship with us? What can we do with that? How can we return value to them? And vice versa, what can we exchange be interesting for us as a commercial enterprise? And that's been so exciting for us. I mean, it means promotionally, you can start your own channel. You can start your own media and you can start it in a big way. No, we're not talking a sort of one listener to 10 to 15. You can instantly overnight promote that to your email list. You need to hold their interest, and you need to make sure that you've got something to talk about, because if you promote this to your email list, they all go there. It's not great, or it's not engaging, and that proves to them that as a brand you don't have much to say. And I think that's not the right outcome. But nonetheless, I think it goes back to the e-commerce retailers have large databases, and that is an audience. It's not just a number of customers through the cash register.
Wow, there's been a lot covered in this interview so far. As a marketing leader, we know you like to spend more time taking action and less time taking notes. So we've got you covered. We packaged up all the tips, strategies, and resources from each episode into some beautifully crafted notes just for you. Not ugly AI-generated transcripts, but real notes taken by a real person on our team. To grab the notes, head on over to growthgenerators.io, look out for this podcast episode and download the notes. But be quick, they're only live for a few weeks after the episode airs. Now, back to the show.
And now, switching gears a bit, you played a key role in preparing for the IPO, and I assume that the genesis of it was to, get the additional funding to keep growing and scaling globally. And what have you noticed then, the pros and cons or the difference of being a CMO pre-IPO and now post-IPO? Obviously, you've got a different audience to serve and there's quarterly earnings that you need to make, but is there more pressure on that growth and scale and retention as a result of this? Or has your role changed much day to day, or what's been the impact?
Personally, for me, I am very driven by performance, very competitive. That's just who I am. I think it probably comes down to so from that point of view, suddenly now I have an audience and a success indicator that I have much less control over. So that's personally how I feel about that. I have lots of control and I love the impact I can have on business performance, but how that's interpreted and how that's valued by our investor audience is generally, and I think probably for my own stable approach to life, it's probably something I shouldn't sort of sweat too much over as to the ups and downs audience and value there. So that's personally, I think, changed in terms of my role. There are some, extra things to do. There is cadence to it as well that usually comes on thick and fast, and then just as abruptly it's gone for another period of time. There's thinking about how things will be received, which is not a standard process when you're not listed. It's like, well, this outcome occurs. Is that in line with expectations? Do we need to, if not, what do we need to do to make sure that we're accountable and honest and open and transparent with our market? So there's that kind of extra thinking piece. And I think there's a natural sort of consolidation, increase in the robust sort of approach to our business where you have to identify your longer term goals and also then stick a path and stick to it and keep on talking about it. And that's that has its rewards. Like, we are building a sustainable business, a high growth sustainable business. And that means there'll be ups and downs in terms of investors and what they want or don't want. But we have to be very clear on our path, our story, what we focused on driving and exploring. That has some strong rewards for team, for instance, because team is always asking, hey, what's the strategy? What's the plan? And it also has impacts for planning and some changes as well. When you think about being a high growth company, you're constantly hiring, but then as you go to being listed, you need to do things in a more measured way. That doesn't mean that you can't, you change your sort of the passion and the energy in the heart of your business, but you need to apply that to a bit of a flywheel. So there's method in the madness.
Yeah.
I think that's had its rewards as well.
Yeah. It's a bit more governance, a bit more kind of risk assessment, a more robust approach, but also, like you mentioned, the connection, I think, between the org strategy and the marketing strategy now has to be absolutely hand in glove, doesn't it? Because you're giving earnings projections and you're talking about what kind of marketing activities are going to give you that growth in acquisition or retention. And obviously marketing is the driver of growth. So there's that really tight connection that sometimes doesn't exist in organizations. There's sometimes a gap between your org strategy and your marketing strategy. So I assume that makes that link even tighter.
Yeah, 100%. I think in the olden days, marketing was the creative part of the business. In an e-commerce business, marketing holds the very direct reins on revenue and growth. And it also tends to be involved with the largest cost lines in the business. So you're naturally across a significant amount of the P&L. I think it means that as you go listed, there's definitely a feeling that, hey, I have accountability to a wider audience, and that, make sure that we make budget or better, and that the costs, we're investing our costs in the right place with good thoughtfulness. There is good governance in place as well. So, it's different but the same, if that makes sense.
Yeah, brilliant, Dan. Well, I'd love to now dig into one of my favourite parts of the show. We're just talking about the team. So I'd love to unpack how you've been building a modern marketing team and how that structure might have changed pre and post IPO.
I think from that very first experience I had at Dell, the biggest message that I sort of learned from that was this kind of apply structure to the relatively mad pace of growth. Apply structure to that, and then anything is possible. Because I was, how old? 25, and I had $25 million budget. And the reason that the organization could trust me with that is because there was only certain ways I could spend it. There was a lot of metrics behind it. And there was very clear goals on what great looked like. I carried that forward as my approach to basic team. You ideally want to make sure that your team knows what great looks like, what performance is, what the KPIs are, and they should have a link to your business's ultimate goals. And there should be a cadence of check-in on that. Now, outside of that, you want to encourage a certain rainbow of risk, exploration, investigation, testing, innovation. And in partnership with that, you need to almost encourage failure, making mistakes, because if you're doing new things, if you're innovating, and if you're pushing the limits, you're going to make mistakes. And if you set the example of mistake is bad, then no one will want to do them. No one will want to test and innovate because there's risk in that. And so you won't get the results that you need. And in the scheme of things, testing and innovating on small percentages of your budget, which you then can use to then scale based on success, you're already controlling for the risk. So rejoice in the failure, rejoice in the mistake, because they're getting you closer to a scalable equation.
Yeah, it's actually more risky to not take the risk, right? If you're just doing what you've always done and expecting a different result, you need to put aside some budget to take some risks. So then digging down a bit, like, how is your team organised? It sounds like it's quite fluid and it changes and growth is consistent, but how do you separate them into portfolios, or who reports into you? Yeah,
so I have 3 main teams that report into me. We have, I guess, our campaign and planning team, and we have brand and content and creative teams. In that sort of 3 structure, the 3 main direct reports, growing upwards of 30 people in the team. Each team has a variety of KPIs. Often they're aligned or they match their counterparts. There is also, different ways that we measure and manage non-linear marketing investments. So things like brand, things like content. So we'll look more to, hey, how is that driving interest? How is that driving audience, building audience? I guess what you could, if you describe it in that sort of standard term of funnel. So how is that growing awareness of Adore Beauty, then growing consideration, then growing sort of trial to site, then growing preference, or sort of growing product purchase, then preference, and so on. But you can also look at it like a cohort, as in how many new customers are you getting, and then what's how are those customers that you acquire? How are they staying with you? How loyal are they? And what kind of value are you exchanging each year? All that sort of stuff.
So do all three teams kind of share some of those responsibilities, or does some have more ownership at different stage in that funnel or journey?
Yeah, so like I just described it, so there's some teams that own more of the audience building, visit the site, traffic, awareness, upper funnel, and then other teams will own the conversion in channel or from channel, and then other teams will involve hey, what offers, what campaigns, what messages are we conveying through both content and those channels that will then improve and enhance the engagement with customer, but also the conversion of customer.
Yeah. So imagine you've got pretty clear customer journey maps, you've got pretty clear internal processes, you've got OKRs for the team so they will know what they're set out to achieve, and then they work together to improve that customer journey and drive conversion through the funnel, each with their own metrics at different stages.
Yeah, look, I think got sort of clear metrics, all that sort of those things that are important to individuals. I think a view on our customer journeys is ever changing, and I think different parts of our team would view that differently. I don't know if we have it consolidated in one place because I think we're constantly sort of trying new things and trying to understand. I guess if I go into Google Analytics and look at customer journeys, they range from 2 clicks to 49 clicks. There's a lot of people with 2 clicks, and that then reinforces a channel perspective. As in, the journey is, I need to get 200 mils Dermalogica XY product. And so I go to Google, I find it, and then I click on it. I go to site, I go through, or I open my email from Adore Beauty because I'm an existing customer. I click on it, I go through. So that's a basic customer journey, but there is such a complexity to customers' journeys now. I think you have to consider what messages are we putting out there and how are we making sure that the different stages of purchase, consideration, but also relationship. Because remember, a lot of our effort is put into having an open conversation via a podcast, which has less to do with we want you to buy right now, but it's more to do with we want you to stay in touch with us so that when you feel like buying, you'll be open to considering us. So when it comes to that journey is not really a journey or a life cycle at all. It's a friendship, right? And a friendship is, I think, a really interesting paradigm to use versus the traditional funnel one. I'm friends with someone. My strongest friendships are across many different facets of my life. Great friendships are deep and broad, and there's lots of different touch points and lots of different connections. It's almost a testing process, right? And I think that's the same with brands. Like if I love a brand, and we notice this when the customers that love us listen to our podcast, they buy from us more frequently because they're more in touch with us. They want to speak to us, just like I speak to my best mate more frequently. They want to speak to us. They want to connect with us more frequently. And when they talk about the value of our brand, they talk about the authenticity, the honesty, the trust. And so that tells us, hey, we better keep on doing that stuff, and we better sort of hold ourselves accountable to, are we living our brand values, and are we showing them in our marketing and advertising?
And in terms of that journey, obviously UX is a big part. Do you have a couple of UXs in the team that are looking and mapping some of those journeys, or?
Yeah, so UX is located in another IT team. There's a lot of close work between those developers and those team members and the marketing team. And when it comes to those traditional roles or responsibilities that cross over a lot of different teams, there may be a person that's responsible, but there's also an investment in multiple teams of care around that topic. So there's people in our marketing team who are involved in UX discussions much more so than others. Same goes in our customer team, same goes in our brands and merchandising team, so on. And those touch points will often work together on single projects or changes or improvements to the customer experience.
Yep, love that. And do you guys work in an agile fashion or use any of those methodologies, or how do you get harmony in the team?
So our team is run by a single piece of software. Marketing briefs are entered and they're carried through. It's probably more laborious and manual than it should be, but it is actually quite the process-driven software. We're looking at other options now, or adding platforms now, but that sort of drives the hum. There's a definite set brief process and follow-up process and analytics process, and there's like I said, KPIs for every channel and every aspect of our team, so that we know what good looks like, and we can look back on that in a weekly, monthly fashion as well. And those KPIs, range from dollars and cost and ROAS, CAC, to LTV.
Yeah, and I understand that you overhauled the data functions. You probably had to put in place some of these metrics or build the engine to develop that. Can you talk briefly about how you created the data function that you've got today and what that looks like?
I think that was a process really of hiring the right people and then determining what the right balance of significant capitalization, significant platform investment versus more agile or lower cost options. What sort of that balance needed to be. And not all those decisions were right, or in hindsight, we might have made some more effective and less effective ones, but that's always the way. Our going in goal was there was 3 aspects to what I wanted to get from data. One was better understanding of future risks, upcoming risks, things to manage and avoid or understand about our business, emerging challenges, a better way of identifying opportunities in our business, and probably distinct projects and improvements in our data to sort of change the level up in terms of what assets and tools we had to go to market and be competitive on an ongoing basis.
And did you hire like pure data scientists? Are they more digital background in data, or what kind of roles did you hire for?
I think the interesting aspect there is that at the heart of it, you want to hire people that are great with data and with numbers. And often now that I think also involves engineering. So it involves getting pipelines and getting data sources, making them organized so they're able to be, that data is able to be moved around, and making them standardized so they're able to be interfaced. So there's lots of engineering and coding, like building skills there. And then there's separately, once they've got the data, lots of analysts sifting through the data, aggregating metadata, all that stuff is like mass data skills. And then once you've got that, then you build on that to actually sort of extract out insights. So that's kind of surface level. What does my customer want? What does merchandising want? And how do I find that for them? So that's another skill set. And then finally, I think the advanced data skill is, well, I'm a commercial data operator. What do I want to find here? And then push out to the different, to go, hey, marketing, you might not realize this, but that your cohort of customers from 2012 is slowly dropping in its, and this isn't happening, by the way, but so there's these different levels, so many different levels, which means that you could hire 8 people and fill each one of those different skill sets. So we went to hire kind of people that had broader skill sets. Yeah. And the challenge there is that the more focused on data you are, I don't think that always comes in pair with natural excitement around discussing with the business commercial opportunities. Looking through the right people for those roles, we had to look around to find commercial ability and data ability.
Yeah, combined together. And I think the latest State of the CMO 2021 report still has that data analytics as a number 1 skill gap. So often still a challenge to get the right kind of expertise in-house that you need. Yeah. And obviously the tech platform and the engineering is also critical. And either way, you kind of break that down into, starting with what are the risks. Now, and are those risks related back to those kind of cohorts or drop-offs in acquisition or retention, or are they bigger?
It's bigger. It's understanding what data is meaningful to your business, like what is commercially relevant, and then using that to spot challenges, because you're always going to get challenges. And COVID occurred. I took some data we got from a third party that was looking at new customers through major retail sort of services. And that told me that we were going to see 2 years worth of new customers in the next 6 months. But it told me that in March last year. And so we made changes pretty fast to prepare for that. It's been able to spot industry trends and how they're going to affect your business, but it's also at a basic level. And I think this is probably just as much as the challenge is to look within your business and go, okay, well, what are the things we want to improve and what's the priority of those things? We went out to the business and said, what questions do you want answered in your area? And if you got those questions answered, what format would you want that answer to be in so that you can do something with it tomorrow? That was the rough brief, right? And so we came up with something like 80 to 100 questions.
Yep.
And then worked through on amalgamating those.
Yeah, makes sense, because in a way you need it to be almost eventually get to a place where it's self-serving, right? When not everyone's relying on your team to pull every single report. You create, what are the questions they want answered? How do you build the dashboards? How do you build that self-serve within the team so they're getting that, and then your team's freed up to look at the bigger risks, the bigger opportunities, the predictive stuff?
100%. I can't tell you, even now, more often than not, I will still speak to people in companies where data is, they're the ones who give me the reports, and they're great at doing reporting. If that's what data is doing, it's a waste of data's time if they're just sending out reports every week. So it should be self-serve. I think there should be a base level of data comfort across your organization. So you need to define where that should be and what's right for your business. But there should be that, right? Everyone should be able to have an intelligible conversation, particularly in an e-commerce business, about the pros and cons of two different investments. Ideally,
Yeah.
there should be a certain level of analytics under.
Yeah, data literacy. Dan, there's so much more I want to talk about. We're getting up against the clock, so a couple more questions before we get to the fast five, maybe two or three. Firstly, what do you think is unique about e-commerce marketing team structures compared to either other more traditional retailers or other professional services marketing teams?
One of the best things about e-commerce roles is that there's an opportunity to actually own your own business within a business. Some of our channel leads are absolutely so crystal clear on that I'm going to go out there and try and do things that will acquire more interest and help customers come to our door, basically. And how am I going to do that? Well, I know the levers I need to try and pull for that. I know what's interesting to me. I know how a customer thinks, so that will help me know where I should go and what I should test and try. And that makes them there's an opportunity for entrepreneurs to exist within e-commerce established businesses, because it used to be that, you're in the marketing department, you draw stuff, you write stuff. You are the expert at producing TV ads. You're the expert at thinking about brand. Not the rest of you don't think about brand, but you think about brand. There was a real division of labor, whereas I think in a modern e-commerce team, there should be plenty of positions in there that in effect almost run their own show. I think the change level is great. So setting aside from those types of positions, every one of my team members, I think proud is probably a reasonable approximation. Humbled is another one. It's somewhere between proud and humble, because I think that they're often doing stuff I couldn't do, or I don't know about yet, or I don't know as much as I'd like to know about. And that's on purpose, because I should hire people that are better at this stuff than I am. And that in my team, that happens a lot. I love and so proud of how quickly some of those team members, in fact, all of the team members, have been able to change through what we were just 4 years ago, a company that was almost a quarter of the size we are today, to now. And that rapid growth involves rapid skills growth as well. There's people that started out doing a single input on a campaign to now owning entire campaign production processes. And that I love seeing that growth. And I think that happens in a lot of fast growth companies. It's very measurable and very visible in an e-commerce company, because there is a great level of trust that comes with clear metrics. The business doesn't have to go, hey, can I spend this money? If it's returning at a cost percentage or a return on ad spend that we are comfortable with, that we've agreed with, then let's go and do that. So it's freeing, it's strong accountability, there's a lot of autonomy. That is a exciting prospect for anybody that thinks about joining us. So this is a great career advertisement, but it's also, I think it's available in the best e-commerce companies, that opportunity.
Yeah. That sounds exciting, the opportunity for entrepreneurship, career growth and development, demonstrating being part of a company that is growing and not having to ask for a business case every time you need new funding for something. You've got the right metrics in place. If you put this many dollars in, you'll roughly get that many out, and the company supports that as long as you continue to meet those targets, which I think is, like you say, very liberating. And you touched on some of the things there around hiring people that are smarter than you, the growth mindset that's needed in a team like that to grow into roles, be comfortable with change. Lastly, before we get to the fast five, what are some of the other leadership lessons or principles that you might have picked up upon your journey and that you think have held you in good stead?
I have a very particular, I'm relatively disorganized, quite chaotic. I am very focused on results and performance and data. And I'm very open and I like to be honest. And I encourage failure. I also share my own mistakes and failures with as much regularity but clarity as I can. It gives others permission to do that. I think that probably out of that, though, what I've learned is that you need different types of people, thinking of a variety of people and my peers as well, different approaches, different format. If you see them, almost treat that as a green flag, like, great, this person thinks differently to me. If they're in my team, then actively amplify or promote that different perspective, because it adds to the skill set of the team. If they're in the organization, not in, embrace that. Earlier in my career, I would have been, when people had different mindsets, particularly engineering, very structured mindsets, I would have seen that as a, hey, you're not being agile, you're not being flexible enough. But actually, sometimes my thinking is too flexible, and that there is value in structure. If I partner with that kind of peer, there's a lot of strength that together we are actually greater than the sum of the parts, because we're complementing each other's strengths and weaknesses. So, I guess that's probably one management leadership perspective. I like honesty and openness and authenticity. I think that hiding your flaws is just a waste of time. It's also, there's a certain dishonesty about it. It's sort of saying that, hey, to be a leader, I need to be perfect. And that's not true. So be open and honest, be a human as much as you can, and be who you are. I think that's really important, and introduce that into your leadership style. So for me, it's how is being authentic helpful commercially? Well, it means that I have direct conversations, but I kind of frame that to myself as I'm not being, my intent here is positive, and I'm looking to do that because I want to improve the performance of our team, give our team more feedback so that they can enhance their careers.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. I think the diversity of team and diversity of thinking is definitely something that you kind of develop through time. I think early in my career, you look to hire people like me. It's egotistical. You soon learn that if you've got everyone that looks like you without that difference of skill set, especially in marketing where you need left brain, right brain, you need people to come at things from different angles, and you talk about design thinking and that need to diverge before you converge. Yeah, your team's really limited if they all look and sound the same and they're not bringing different ideas to the table and they're not creating a bit of conflict. You come back to Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, and you got to have that trust which comes through authenticity, and without that you can't go into conflict, which is needed before you get to high performance, and realizing that some conflict is good and not shying away from that and leaning into that. So great lessons there.
Yeah, no, I think they all ring true to me. I think there's 2 other ones. One is the culture of Adore Beauty has been really sort of a bit of a step change for me. I think that in a lot of the previous organizations I was at, I don't know if they had such a defined culture. And I think it was probably more amorphous and less of a commitment. It's a real commitment. And so I think that's been a real reinforcement to me that the business has cultural values, but I need to have values in my work. I need to have beliefs and live true to them. Because that's one of the first things. I arrived in the company and went, okay, well, there's a lot of clear values and things. And in my performance review, I'll be asked, hey, did you do the right thing? That's one of the values. Did you do the right thing? How did you do the right thing? And next quarter, how are you planning to do more of the right thing? And so when you get those sort of questions, you have to go, well, what are my values? The company's very clear on its values. What do I believe in? How can I make sure that meshes with the company values? Or where it doesn't, I call that out. So I think values are really important. And one other one, which is probably more incidental, is I think leadership. Often people go, leadership is inspirational. Leadership is the Braveheart speech, You'll never take our freedom. And leadership is Barack Obama. Leadership has this really inspirational thing. I think for a long time I was like, I would wake up in the morning and go, when am I going to be inspirational? At least I am fooling myself if I think that I am the most important thing in my team's day. I think there's lots of other considerations for them. They all have a lot of passion about the roles they're doing. There's a certain amount of things they're looking to leadership to support them on. And where you can be inspirational is sometimes just doing your bloody job, which is communicating. And, that's something that I think I still have got a long road to go on. Communicating changes, sharing information, providing a clear view on, plans as a team, saying stuff that hasn't yet been said, questioning the stuff that needs to be questioned, that everyone is being too polite to do, or everyone doesn't know if they're allowed to question. You can lead, the lucky opportunity to lead on those moments. They tend to be the sort of closer to actually being really impactful to people, is when you sort of openly question something that's been accepted, or question whether that's fair, or question whether we should change that particular.
Leadership is never easy, is it? But by doing that and questioning, you're giving the team to do the same. You're giving them permission, and that's what creates that openness and authenticity and trust. Well, Dan, we are now up to our Fast 5. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay. So what do you believe are 3 essential capabilities or criteria of a high-performance marketing team?
I think open conversation. So direct, open conversation, the permission to have open conversation about performance. I'd say trust that I can fail and going to get in trouble. Clear view on what good looks like.
Yeah.
A clear view on what performance looks like. That needs to be defined.
Yeah. In some ways, that is what's inspiring, and people knowing what they're aiming for. They've got a purpose and they know if they're headed in the right direction or not. And how would you describe your team's culture in one word?
I would say ambitious. Often it's not only about, hey, we want to achieve this goal for the company. It's like, how can I do better in this area that I'm in? How can I do great things?
Yeah.
And I think that's just amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what's one metric that you successfully use to track and measure team performance?
Growth in each area, whether that be listener growth, subscription growth, revenue growth, impact of campaign or promotion growth.
Makes sense. What's one skill or capability you've learned recently you wish you developed earlier in your career? It's
this concept of positive intent. So I've practiced positive intent variably across my career. But again, it's one of the Adore Beauty values. And so often, rather than before in my career where I'd be like, if I was feeling confident and stable and I got into a disagreement with a fellow worker, I would depending, if I was feeling great, then I might go, hey, they've got positive intent. Let's all work together.
Yeah.
But if I was unsure about our direction or things weren't going well performance-wise, I might go, no, they're necessarily encroaching on what I do. This is not fair. I think now relentlessly, I love taking a perspective of positive intent.
Yeah, I like that. It's almost like a mirror you need to hold up all the time. And on the flip side, also creates a deeper connection with the other person. You're bringing that right mindset to it. We're both coming at this from the right way, and we both want the right outcome, and it's not adversarial and check your ego at the door. So let's work together to get the right outcome. And lastly, what book or books have you read that you found yourself recommending to others, or that you think our audience would gain value from?
I don't read that many books. I listen to probably quite a lot of podcasts. Outliers, I think it's by Malcolm Gladwell. That's a good one.
Yeah.
For all the outliers out there, I like that. Even one of my first books I read way back when was the Michael Dell book about, I think it was The Direct Way or something like that.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, Dan, thank you so much for your time today. We've had quite a long conversation because there was so much I wanted to dig into, and I've really enjoyed learning more about your career, fascinating career, starting from Dell and all the way to Adore Beauty, how you've helped Adore IPO. Some of those leadership lessons that you shared at the end I found quite powerful, and just how you're building a modern team and taking that data-driven approach to deliver great results for the business, but what sounds like great results for the team and the company as well. And sounds like a really good fit there. So thank you once again for coming on the show.
Great. Thank you very much for having me. Really, really appreciate it. Enjoyed the conversation.
You've been listening to Lean Mean Marketing Teams with Ty Hayes. If you love the show, please remember to hit subscribe so that you can discover more tips and strategies to build a high-performance marketing team. And if you're feeling generous, please tell someone about the show who you think would benefit. We're on a mission to help CMOs build their dream team and enable marketers to do their best work. And we appreciate your help in spreading the word.